It's an E-Class 2001 Estate. First thing you do, you jack her up. You want to get the axle stand in underneath. I loosened the wheel nuts, obviously, before I jacked it up. It's just a matter of spinning them out. Now, I normally give this a kick backwards. Because they do get stuck on. Next thing to do, break off. That's 18mm. There goes the first one. It's loose, we'll just leave that and do the second one. There we go. And that's the second one done. Next thing you need before you take it off is a tie wrap. I'm a big fan of releasable tie wraps. You don't have to cut them, you can just release it when you finish with it. It's worth just easing the pads out. And then that actually comes off a bit easier. And then if you do put a crowbar in, like that, twist, and it pushes them out a bit for when you put it back on again, you don't have to worry about it. So I then put tie wrap through the hole and up round my self-leveling pipes, and that keeps it right out of the way, which is what you want when you're doing this job. M5 Allen head. These have been replaced because they previously went. I had to re-tap the hole as well. Right, now to take this plastic cover off the bottom wishbone, I've got these two small M10 bolts. It's on the jack at the moment, which is not obviously a great idea when you're working on a car. So, screwdriver, you can just prise it off. There we go. That's the plastic bit. Put that over here. There are a bunch of spares. Hopefully to go on back on at a later date. Next job now is to where you can see a purchase underneath now. You get I've gone for the mother of all axle stands today. So that's now placed underneath the bottom wishbone, just in front of where it's attached to the chassis. And then I'll let it down a bit so it just sits. I will actually let it sit just above it. There we go. So that's on it now. So if I just jack it up just a little bit like that, so that gives us good protection if the stand does go, but doesn't put a lot of strain on the stand or the suspension bit that we want to work on. So it's all good to go now. We're going to take this disc off, which will be an absolute pig. So you're going to need a large persuader, this size, a large persuader, and a rubber mallet. So we'll stick the mallet on there and give it a few taps. I'll come back when I've got it off. It could take quite a while. So it was as suspected, an absolute pig. That took me 3 or 4 minutes of hard banging with a mallet and the sledgehammer, and it's finally gone ping. And you'll feel it just doesn't do anything, and then suddenly it just lets go and it pings off. And there you go. That's the disc. So the next thing I'm going to do is hold my breath and give it a blowout. Nice to have a airline, just makes life a lot easier. Right, hang on everyone. You don't have to remove the brakes, you don't have to remove the shock. So the next thing to do I think we'll unbolt the very tight bolt. This is done up to silly torque. So first of all we've got to, you see it's got a piece of metal on the nut that's bent in to stop it undoing. So we've got to prise that open, and the more gently you prise that open, it's worth spending some time getting that open really nicely, so when you put it back on you can push it back in again. So that's what we're doing next. So I've got a couple of little screwdrivers here and I'm going to try and ease it. So I don't know if it's pressed in with the machine when it's made. You need to be really gentle when you start doing it, otherwise you'll knacker it. There we go, it's come out. Now this is a 32mm socket. Right, so I've just put the car back on its wheels again because the torque involved is stupid, so I didn't want to rattle it off the jack or anything. So we've got the 4-foot bar on here, and I'm only going to apply a massive amount of force. Yeah, I think she's gone. There we go. Now all you need is a 2-foot bar. And once it's broken, you don't need anything at all. Let's get her axle well stand back underneath. Don't go any further. Okay, so now we assemble the tools we need to get this off, which is a M12 4-square, specially used on Mercs, BMWs and I think VWs as well, suspension. It's meant to be a high torque bolt head, but they're a right pain in the arse to move, and an 18mm socket. So the first one is the top trailing arm. So if you get your socket on, you're halfway there. Right. Now you have to be very careful with these, that they're in square and not at an angle, because otherwise you'll ruin the head and then you really are screwed. This one is actually coming out quite easily. Quite often get a lot more trouble than this. She's gone. Right, so now I can put the small ratchet on. Nuts off. To aid us, what we'll do is we'll jack it up. So, having 2 jacks here makes life considerably easier. Clean it up. Screw it back on, and then you've got some hope of getting it off the... There we go. So I'll clean all of these up before they go back on. So now we've got the first one off, you can actually see that we can get the spanner onto the second one, which you can't do the other way around. So we've finally got the thing on, and it's undoing. punch, or just punch it out. See, I'm only tapping it, there's not much force involved. There we go, second one out. It's slow progress, and you've got to be... There's a 1/2 inch bar, and I'm putting quite a lot of force onto it. I think we've got it now. There she is. Right, so we'll clean all of those up before we put them back in. They're all the same length, so it doesn't matter if you swap them over. We pull this back and we give that a little tap. So you need a hammer and a hammer. What I do is I put one on here like this, and I'll clobber it like that. But you have to, with your foot, get your foot the other side of this top suspension link, so it pushes back. There you go, bang, first time. And then you can push it out. You can see it's coming out the back, no problem. There she goes. So, if anyone tells you you've got to take it all off, that's just 3 suspension bolts and we've got it out. Now you need a 6x2. In this case, it's more like 5x2. It goes under there. And I'm going to chip the old one off because I've MIG welded it on several times. So we'll chip that off now. Okay, so we need to now put it back into neutral, because we'll make sure it's chopped up properly. So now we can spin this round freely. Well, when I say freely, you can spin it round. Just so you can see here just what a poor condition the whole thing's in. Clean all this up now with a big rotary wire brush on the grinder, and then put a bit of rust preventer on, and come back and show you what it looks like. And this bit of wood is really handy, either this way or this way, for holding it up when you're working on it. The other thing it's worth doing while you got this all apart and it's easy to access is this is the sensor, a magnetic sensor, which goes in this hole here, and it's always an absolute pig to get in and out. It's got one of these E10 type reverse Torx heads. That you should be able to get out fairly easily, but then getting this out is near on impossible because it's all rusted up inside. So if you use a bit of plywood, you can put that up because you've got free access, and you can knock the sensor backwards. You see, there's the sensor in there. You can knock it backwards up out of the socket, and that works really well, and it doesn't damage it. And then you can clean it up and put it back together. So if you do have any trouble, because obviously with the new ring on, if the old ring has worn it out, then you'll have to put a new one on, because it won't be close enough anymore. So we've taken that precaution because it's easy to do now. It takes about 10 minutes. Then I clean that out with a Dremel and a bit of sandpaper, and now you can, as you can see, it fits very easily. So I'll screw that back in. Now it comes to putting it back together. So first thing we've got to do, bend the half shaft right up like that, and you'll find it's not quite enough. So you have to give things a bit of a tap and a bit of a pry to get them aligned properly. Just it goes. She's in. So you can re-engage the splines next on the hub. That's done. So what I did here was put about an inch spacer between the bottom link and the centre link and the rear suspension, and then I had to push the whole of this assembly forward so it met up. Now I had to use all my weight to do that, so I couldn't push the bolt in, so I had to get the other half to push the bolt in for me while I was doing it. So a reassembly might not be the opposite of taking it apart, because with the other one I put the two top bolts in first and then I used a crowbar to move it, and that moved quite easily, so that might be a better solution if you're on your own. As you can see, when doing this up, you've only got a couple of clicks each time, so it does take quite a time to do these back up again. Now, as it's suspension, you want them properly tight. I think the book says about 70 foot-pounds, so I've done so many bolts that I can do them sort of by eye for that, and that's about 70, give or take. It's not coming off anyway. That's the bottom line, of course. So when you put this together, make sure you do these bolts the other way round. I can get an 18mm spanner on here, so it's not too bad. But do the top one first, and then do that one, and then of course you've got enough room to get a socket on there. Got all three suspension mount bolts in and tightened up, torqued up. I put the half shaft nut on. Put the nut on, just torqued it up just very lightly. Now we're going to put the disc back on with its screw and check the alignment of this protecting plate here, because it's all got bent where we had to move it, and because it's so rusty it stays in the bent position. I'm going to tap the disc back on. I've aligned it so I've got a hole at the top with the screw hole on its right hand side, so now I can confidently give it a tap from there. Good old copper and hide again, and if you can get it lined up straight away, so much the better. Should call that a socket head really, not an Allen head. But, that's tight. Okay, as you can already see, that's touching there, so bend that back. That's probably where we had this bit here done. It's not looking so good there either. Oh dear, this bit's going to fall off very shortly. Be very careful with that. Put the caliper back on. If you haven't got one of these, highly recommend it. It's got a built-in ratchet. For doing these back bolts on the suspension, mine's paid for itself about 20 times, because you can just do this. You see how quick that's happened? So just do it up lightly, round it off, and do the top one. I always tap these. Probably about 50 foot-pounds, I reckon I do those two. Okay, there we go. That's about right. Now I put this protecting piece back on, and we'll be ready to lower it down. That clips on. There we go. Final look underneath, you can see the new Reluctor ring, and just visually checking that all the bolts have undone, done back up again, job done. Wheel on, back on the ground. Make sure you haven't got the Mercedes star in the middle of it. I've now got my glamorous assistant helping me, and we're just doing a final torque on the bolt. So I've got the 4-foot extension bar on. Just propping the socket up so it can't run off centre, because that would be bad. Okay, so I'm going to pull the bar out a bit this time. Okay, here we go again. There we go, I think that should be it. Final thing we have to do now we've got the wheel back off is to push this nut retainer ring back. There we go, and you can see now why I was so careful when we took it off, because if you're really careful like that, you knock it back straight in the same place. Job done. Road wheels on, take it for a test drive.